Woo-wee! On today's show, everybody, despite all the waiting, despite the premature reports, destiny arrives all the same. Talking Jayce Tingler being dismissed, being relieved of his duties as manager of your San Diego Padres. The wild card round that unfortunately resulted in the Dodgers winning and moving on. The rest of the season preview, or I guess playoff preview, I should say. And then who the heck is going to replace Mr. Jayce Tingler? All that and more, guys. Locked On Padres. Here we go.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Thursday, October 7th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You might be familiar with some of my baseball-related work at places like Baseball FYI, Friars on Base, Off Bench Baseball, or the biggest one, Just Baseball. Really great site. Go check that out. I am a staff writer there. Maybe pop culture is your thing. You can find my work at places like Nerdist, Mental Floss, and Verseplay, discussing film cred and more, and hopefully many more to come. And I can confirm that there are more to come when it comes to pop culture stuff. That should be fun over the coming months. But of today's episode, guys, firstly, before we get into it, I just want to tell you, you can follow me at Javapeno on Twitter, which is JAVIIPENO. And if you see me pointing right now, that means you're watching the YouTube. That's right. We have a YouTube channel, Locked On Padres. The YouTube. Simple as that. You can go check that out. Going to be getting a new camera and new setup soon, which should make all the off-season stuff even more, I guess, exciting to watch, hopefully for you guys. And also follow the Twitter account for the show, which is at LO_Padres. Lots of Padres memes on there. Most of my baseball takes on there. Let's just be honest. That's where most of my baseball takes come from, but a lot of fun on there for sure. Again, guys, as always, I want to thank you, my listeners, for making Locked On Padres your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Hashtag first listen. I must say, though, maybe I wasn't your first listen today. And let me explain why. Okay? Let me explain exactly why. All right? I thought I almost exited out the browser for a second. This Restream application, for some reason, just wasn't working. I know. Look, I was working a lot yesterday. Not that I'm complaining or anything. That was my fault. But I expected the episode to get out a lot earlier. And unfortunately, I couldn't. I'm sorry about that. You'll probably get this by the time the ALDS games are starting between the White Sox and the Astros and the Rays and the Red Sox. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. But I figured, instead of talking about the game last night, because honestly, that's depressing, and I try my best not to make the content super depressing and irritating for you guys, even though based on just studies and audience engagement research, oftentimes when you have topics that are going to get people triggered and, annoyed and kind of pissed off, that'll get you more engagement, whatever. I'm in the good mood today. So I want to talk about first Jayce Tingler. So, okay. I guess you could argue that this will also put you in a bad mood. So we're kind of between a rock and a hard place, but yesterday, it was announced that Jayce Tingler was being fired by the Padres as manager, effective immediately. Made the whole announcement. There was an article, a big Q&A over on The Athletic that you can read that Dennis Lund did with Peter Seidler. And not too much there that I felt was too important to talk about. But in general, I mean, yeah, I've said this for a month now. To be honest, not to do the whole pat on my back thing. I'm not doing that. But, this is kind of what had to happen. The Padres were devastating, 19-39 down the stretch, losing games that they need to win, getting no hit by the D-backs, the worst team in all of baseball. And you just can't have it. You just cannot have it, ladies and gentlemen. And at some point, something had to happen, right? They already got rid of Sam Gainey. They already got rid of Larry Rothschild. Right. And one thing that I thought was interesting about that, they said Jayce Tingler has been invited to potentially come back as some part of the organization, whatever that means. Look, I don't want to good riddance, get him out of the building. I don't want any people's jobs and have some level of sympathy, most as you guys. But when you're going, like I said, 19th stretch, 26-43 overall in the second half, something has to change. And unfortunately for Jayce Tingler, that was his job status. I think my first reaction to the news, aside from being like, well, is also, I've also been talking on the podcast, aside from saying that he was going to get fired, is that I don't think this is something to celebrate. Just for the aforementioned reason that I don't like celebrating people like just losing their jobs. It makes me feel all weird. Like, I mean, at some level, it's not Jayce Tingler's fault that Trent Grisham can't hit an inside fastball. You know what I mean? That's not, I mean, yeah, you can blame him a little bit, but at some point, guys got to produce. Instead of playing like average, which is the sentiment I have echoed throughout not just last month, but the past 3 months, is that everybody just, Tatis, Cronenworth to an extent, and Joe Musgrove. You know, and hey, even Machado had that really one poor month back in July. So, you know, when it comes to a poor finish, that goes all over the place. You know what I mean? So you can't just blame Jayce Tingler. And now we're on the hunt for a new manager. And my thing about that is, who's it going to be? Right? There's plenty of names. They've said that Peter Seidler said that previous managing experience is not going to be a requirement, which I actually think is quite bad. Hey, we talked about the other day about how the Yankees lost, right? And how Aaron Boone, I swear that man is not liked by any Yankee fan. I swear. It's either they're indifferent or they don't like him. And a big reason they don't like him is because it's like, why did this guy get one of the most prized possessions in all of, can I say in all of sports, maybe North American sports? You could argue that this is one of the biggest, like, most high profile ones, maybe coach of the Dallas Cowboys. I don't know. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on that. But like, you give it to someone who essentially parlayed one home run into an entire career, whether it be his work with ESPN as an analyst and then actually being the manager of the Yankees. And everyone's like, he doesn't have any previous experience. So my thing is, like, if they're already saying that doesn't cut off somebody if they haven't had a lot of previous managing experience, then the first thing I think of is what the Athletic piece kind of feared, which is, what if this is just going to be another situation where they get an extension of the front office instead of someone who thinks differently than AJ Preller, someone who views things just a little bit differently and says, you know what, no, I'm not just going to listen to everything that AJ Preller does. I have my own opinions, my own thoughts. I don't know. I just don't know what that means in terms of the future of the franchise. I don't think that's a good thing. And more importantly, so but now be the fifth manager we're going to be on under the AJ Preller tenure. I saw some people talking about, fire AJ Preller and stuff. I still think that that's not. I don't want to go understand your anger. I'm angry too. I mean, I literally tweeted my support for this guy all the time, begging him to murder me. And I think he listened. I think that he actually did literally murder me. He murdered my heart. He murdered my heart. I mean, it's just it's really sad there. But Seidler said his job is as safe a GM's job could be, whatever that may mean. If he's trying to allude to the fact that GMs can get fired, I don't know what he's saying exactly with that comment. But AJ Preller is not going anywhere. Bottom line is, there's a lot of aspects of this. There's the aspect of, let's not just blame Jayce Tingler. There's also the aspect of some of the bullpen decisions, keeping Blake Snell in for too long, the fact that no one really improved this year. Like that's a little weird, right? Like, I don't think there's a single player that really improved. Maybe Nabil Krismat. Like, I can't really find any Mark Millen. No, Mark Millen has always been. There aren't too many players that got better. That's a really bad sign too. There's only players that got worse, right? And at some point you need to make a change, and the Padres did that. You know what I'm saying? And I think that when we look at this offseason, that's going to be the biggest question. Who are they going to bring in? Is it going to be some no name, which, not to hate on no names, oftentimes the greatest ever, they come from no-name backgrounds. That's just what happens. You know what I'm saying? But I don't like just the vibe of what's going on here, where people are just acting like this was the big firing that needed to happen. It was necessary. It was kind of expected. But I don't want to go acting like this is going to fix everything and that he was the only problem. Front office is a problem. Front office culture, I believe, is the problem. I am putting a lot of stake into that Athletic piece. And also, I don't know what's going to happen when it comes to the future of the team. I just don't. I don't know what Preller is going to do. I genuinely don't. He could do some magic like he did in 2015, like he did when he made all those mistakes that he was able to recover from, getting Tatis on this team in the first place, getting Manny Machado on this team in the first place. It's going to be very, very interesting. So while I understand that you guys are probably not all that interested in talking baseball, I can tell. I look up the view counts and all that stuff. I can promise you it is not going to be a boring offseason. In fact, I think out of all the teams in baseball, it's going to be one of the more interesting in all the league. I really do. I think that there's a lot of turmoil and there's a lot of questions with who they're going to trade, what they're going to trade for, what they're going to go for, if they're going to trade for anybody. Lots of drama. Guys, But before we talk about some more things about who the future manager of the Padres could be, some of my thoughts on that, just expounding upon it a little bit more on this lovely Thursday day, I want to talk to you guys really quickly about Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often these pointless questions like is your Odyssey an LX or is it an EX? I don't know, man. I don't know anything about cars. Thankfully, though, you have access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Why choose spends 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? For example, Honda Odyssey fuel pump, it's $353 from a chain store, only $216 from Rock Auto. All right, and they have every type of equipment you can need, and parts that you can need, I should say. And they've been serving auto parts customers and do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Go explore their easy-to-use website today, guys. RockAuto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in their "How'd you hear about us" box, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. And we're continuing again for making Locked On Padres your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, just a reminder. And, YouTube as well. Check that out. You guys might be watching it now as we speak. The next thing I want to talk about is a little bit more diving into the possible replacements. All right. The replacements, both in terms of literally like specific names and replacements in terms of, like the energy we should be looking for. What kind of person, not necessarily a specific name, but what kind of person, right? And that's where things get a little bit dicey. Now, I talked about this before. I talked about this on Friday, in fact, when it came out in the Athletic piece, some of the names. Some of the big names that were mentioned were Bruce Bochy, Buck Showalter, and Ron Washington. I'm not going to totally get into Ron Washington again, because I think Ron Washington I went into enough as someone I would not like to bring to this Padres organization. I think when we're having now the Padres organization isn't in disarray as far as we know, in terms of like kind of the things that are relating to Ron Washington, which is some sexual harassment sort of issues. So let's be clear about that. That's not what I'm trying to imply. But as someone who really pays attention to a lot of things, and I imagine you guys do too, you guys and gals, that the way sports has been heading, you look at the Portland Trailblazers, the Dallas Mavericks, you look at all this stuff that's happening across sports and how little they seem to do to care about these things. That if you're just going to be in sports, you're part of this fraternity and they don't really care how you're treating women and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? And that's a really, really bad look for society, in my opinion, anyway. Not to go all, liberal on you guys or anything like that, but that's just how I view it. So Ron Washington, while I do think he's an admirable candidate in terms of his managing skills, I think there are other directions you can go. Bruce Bochy, I believe in the Athletic piece. The Athletic piece was saying, with the micromanager that Preller is, Bruce Bochy ain't coming out of retirement for that. He does have the connection, which is true, managing the team from the 90s, late 90s, 96 to 2005, which is great. And they were pretty good, by the way, around those times. One team, in fact, the 1998 team is probably one of the best Padres teams ever. Shout out Ricky Henderson. Past his prime, Ricky Henderson, but still, nonetheless, it was a very good Padres team. So there would be a lot of like nostalgia, you know what I mean? And I'd love that. I would love the energy of being like, we're running it back. You know what I mean? We're bringing this guy back. He's now with a more exciting, it's at least up there with the 98 team. And it definitely has bigger stars than the 98 team, with Tatis being obviously the headliner and all that. So I think he would at least be interested. But unless Preller somehow takes a little bit of a step back, which given his job security, given how much power he has in the organization, probably, and in fairness, because he's earned it mostly over the past few years, barring a little bit of a disaster in 2021, that I think that I don't see that as likely that he's able to concede that. We'll see, though, because if that does happen, if Bruce Bochy does become the next manager of the Padres, then I think that that's a sign that AJ Preller is listening and he's saying, you know what, maybe I have been a little bit too hands-on. He's a smart guy. He's brilliant. He works hard. I believe that stuff. And I think what was interesting about that Athletic piece is that there were also quotes from people that were like, hey, like, I think that this is a little bit, of an oversimplification. He works really hard. And I don't think all this stuff about how he dictates practices and all that are necessarily entirely accurate. You know what I'm saying? So I do think that there's hope here, unlike some other managers that we've seen throughout the league, some other organizations where you're like, oh my, Mets doing, you know what I'm saying? What are the Rockies doing? There wasn't any kind word said about those teams, for example, right? So that's one thing to think about. Then last person, Buck Showalter, who I have no issues with. I'm a fan of Buck Showalter. I enjoyed him managing. He had a very calm influence that I actually thought was very helpful. I remember again, not to get overly political, I remember during like the Baltimore riots that happened in like 2015, I believe was the year, because it was my graduation year from high school. Like a very calm response to all that. If you guys remember, they played in an empty stadium. That was a whole thing. Very important societal issues at stake, and he handled that very well. And I think that might, at least, again, I am projecting a little bit. I'm not as big of an insider as your Kevin ACs and Dennis Lyns, who know everything in the league that's going on right now, including all the behind the scenes stuff. They know something that's going to get announced in 2 years. Those guys, you know what I mean? They do great work. But I will say that just based off what I've seen of Buck Showalter, yes, I know people roast him all the time for not taking initiative and bringing Zach Britton, their all-star, all-pro, all-timer season closer, in that playoff game against the Blue Jays when there was a tie game that they didn't even use him once. They do blame him a little bit for that. But in general, I thought those Orioles teams were good. I thought they were pretty exciting in a lot of ways. They were home run power, and I want to get back to Slam Diego power. So maybe that might kind of work, and it'll be a sign that Preller, again, might be reaching out a little bit and being like, I'm not going to micromanage you and your managing style. I'm going to listen to your input. I'll give you the pieces and all that, and we'll discuss things before just, say, trading Franmil Reyes. Was it a bad trade? I don't necessarily think so, but not talking to anybody about it, that's not always a good sign. So that's what I think. But in terms of the philosophy of who the Padres should be looking for, I'd be a little bit disappointed if you brought in another Jayce Tingler-like candidate. And I alluded to earlier about Aaron Boone. And Aaron Boone, like I said, getting that position, like one of the most desirable in professional sports, it just feels very weird to me. It's like, really? Like, this feels very, like, a lot of nepotism going on here. And don't get me wrong, nepotism is prevalent throughout all professions, no matter what there's nepotism involved in me doing this podcast in some way. You know what I'm saying? And there's all sorts of connections that happen, right? But with Aaron Boone, it was like, you don't even have the experience for this. And it's like, you look at like Marvel Comics, Marvel Comics is very, very tight knit when it comes to who they allow to write Spider-Man stuff for them. Not their mainline Spider-Man, but all sorts of Spider-Man stories. They're picky about that stuff, man, because that is their golden egg character. Obviously, you guys know this. Everybody knows who Spider-Man is. It's my boy as well, my favorite fictional character of all time. And you see J.J. Abrams come in and his son, and he gets his son a gig to write on that comic, to work with him. I understand the J.J. Abrams part. He's a very powerful figure in entertainment. But then it's like, you want to tell me nepotism don't exist? I'm not saying J.J. Abrams' kid isn't talented, but like, he ain't getting that job if J.J. Abrams isn't his dad. You know what I'm saying? This is a very desirable position. And apparently that Spider-Man comic was really dark and kind of messed up. Go look that up. Let me know about that for all my nerds that are listening right now. But I do think that is the bad side of things, where you start hiring people that aren't ready, and then you just might get a replicate of Jayce Tingler, where it's just a guy that isn't going to be able to soften the blows of potential locker room disputes, any type of chemistry things, see things on the field and in the locker room that we don't see as fans, and kind of address them. You know what I mean? If you're not as experienced, at least in my opinion. Or it could go the way of, say, a Gabe Kapler, who comes into the league and no one really believes in him. Maybe take a guy that nobody believes in right now, like Gabe Kapler was after leaving Philadelphia, and then look at him on the Giants. Doing pretty damn good, choosing the right times to pinch hit Lamonte Wade, choosing when to use Darren Ruff, choosing whether or not to use Taylor Rogers or Jake McGee. You know what I mean? Like all those type of relief pitchers that they have. And I imagine he has some input too. That organization is run really well. So on the same time, I do understand that some unknown, not necessarily guys that we've seen in the league in a long time, is also a viable option. But in my opinion, for this team, considering all the things we've heard about locker room stuff, about the fact that you've got some big personalities on the team, some young personalities, but it's not a totally young team. That's what I think people forget. A team like the White Sox has a little bit more youth to them than I'd say the San Diego Padres do, especially because, hey, Machado's turning 30. You know what I'm saying? Like, Machado's going to be 30 years old. Like, he's not exactly young. It's just that Tatis is the big young one on this team. And the team clearly flows through him. So ostensibly, you almost feel like it is a young team, but it's not totally a young team. But that's just my thoughts on that. Between all three of those candidates that have been mentioned, I like the idea of Buck Showalter the most. I feel like there's not as much baggage there. I liked what he did in Baltimore. But again, it's going to be hard to bring him out of that, that booth and doing what he's doing on Yes and all these channels. So I think that'll be interesting. But I imagine more names will pop up as time goes on. But all I know is this: I will be very skeptical. I wasn't skeptical enough when they hired Jayce Tingler. I will be a little bit more skeptical if it's yet another one who Preller knows from Texas, or another one of Preller's guys. I'll be a lot more skeptical, I have to admit, versus when I was the first time. But that's basically it for my thoughts on that, guys. Now, let me just quickly talk to you about betonline.ag. Yeah, I'm really drawing it out on that one. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know. For BetOnline, guys, we're back and better than ever when it comes to football. They've got all your stuff, number one spot for all the pro and college football action this year with a new updated site and interface, even more odds, props, and contests. BetOnline continues to be the number one source for everything football. Head to the website using your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Don't forget to use your promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. They also have football. They have football. Then they've got basketball. They've also got baseball, hockey, boxing, whatever you want. They're gonna have some future stuff coming out. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's wrap this bad boy up. I just want to talk a little bit about the NLDS, the wild card, I should say. The Dodgers won last night by a score of 3-1. Chris Taylor getting the big hit. It's funny because, and again, I'm not trying to be the pat on my back guy. I actually called it. I said that was going to happen. I was just like, it's not going to be the big name kind of drama players. Justin Turner does get a big hit in this game, and I do not like Justin Turner. A long time listeners of the podcast, that's probably my least favorite Dodger. No, it's not true. Joe Kelly is. I genuinely hate Joe Kelly. I hate that dude. I think he's a jerk. But the Cardinals battled, man. I mean, that's a good baseball team. I mean, good defense. They had some errors on the field in this game, though, from Edmundo Sosa, who made like 4,000 errors, which was very odd. But for the most part, really good game. And just goes to show you, it's so funny how the postseason works, right? Tommy Edman being the biggest batter in this game for the Cardinals, 3 for 5 with a strikeout. I don't know why I included that. 3 for 5 with scoring 1 run, the only run that the Cardinals get, and 2 stolen bases. Not Paul Goldschmidt getting the big hit, not Tyler O'Neill, not Nolan Arenado, not Dylan Carlson, not my Puerto Rican man, Yadier Molina, not any of their best players, Harrison Bader, who's had some playoff moments before, not those guys. It's Tommy Edman, who had a WRC plus below 100 this year and an OPS below 700 at 693. You know what I'm saying? It's like this is what happens in the postseason sometimes. People will just have their moments. You guys know the David Freese call? When we'll see you tomorrow night. Joe Buck, brilliant. Just brilliant stuff. Like he became a superhero in the playoffs. Oftentimes, it isn't necessarily going to be the stars. You expect the most from your stars, but when it comes to batters, you might get your Tommy Edman, who just becomes the hero of the postseason. That's just what happens sometimes. So that's what I would say about the rest of the playoffs in general, guys. That'd be my lesson. You don't really know what's going to happen. Stop acting like because the Dodgers won in 2020 that we know for a fact that all of their previous struggles are behind them and no one can beat them. Not to mention they have a tough series. It's incredible first round matchup between the Giants and the Dodgers. I think we all know who us in for in that one. Should be a lot of fun. I thought it was actually a really intense game. The best part about playoff baseball, while the game did somehow manage to last like 4.5 hours, despite only being like a 1-run game for most of the thing until the Chris Taylor walk-off. It's thrilling, like every pitch. I don't know about you guys, but because I have a vesting rooting interest that the Dodgers lose, it's just thrilling. I love it so much. It is my favorite kind of format of playoffs out of all the sports. Maybe that is because my football team is traditionally a heartbreak and it always breaks me and I like not to think about it. I definitely don't like the NBA playoffs the most because the NBA round is so bad. Like you're just getting a lot of block games that you don't care about. You're like, all right, get to the main event. It's like watching a pay-per-view event. It's like, I don't need to see, the Lakers stomp the Grizzlies like they did in 2020. Like I just, why? Like they're going to win. Like we don't, unless barring an injury, like that's just, it doesn't interest me. You know what I mean? In terms of that, the nerves aren't there. When it comes to playoff baseball, man, holy dear Lord, just absolutely incredible stuff. And also just got to give a shout to Adam Wainwright. The fact that the Cardinals are in this game is incredible. Amazing end to their season, winning those 18 games straight. And I will say it felt a little bit good to be good. It felt a little bit too good to be true when it comes to the Cardinals if they were able to beat the Dodgers last night with a 40-year-old Adam Wainwright beating a 107-win Dodgers team. That feels like it's us Padres fans. We're like, oh man, like we're fantasizing about something that probably won't happen. Can it happen with the Giants? Of course. Can it happen with another team? Of course. But when it comes to this team, yeah, I do admit that. I didn't really expect it, but he still played well. I mean, Adam Wainwright only gives up 1 run. Scherzer isn't on fire, but he was much better than, say, Garrett Cole, who we talked about on a previous episode about how he did not pitch like someone who thought he was the second best pitcher in baseball. Yeah, I'll take Max Scherzer over him. Even on an off night, he didn't completely implode. He was a little bit frustrated when he got taken out, but just 1 earned run on 3 hits, 3 walks, 4 strikeouts. Not a great start, but it certainly isn't a start that kills you. That's why you have a team. You know what I mean? But Garrett Cole, 2 innings, whew, and change. Not great for Garrett Cole. And all these videos are coming out about how he's being taunted by the Red Sox fans and all that. So really rough there. In terms of the rest of the postseason, I'm most looking forward to the White Sox and Astros. That should be going on literally as you are watching this, most likely, because it's a late upload. Again, my apologies for that. But I really love the White Sox team. I think they are the Padres of the American League. I should say they're the 2020 Padres of the American League, because 2021 Padres, whew, less said about them, the better. Even though this is a Padres podcast. But yeah, I think that the White Sox have so much swagger on their team, from Tim Anderson to Eloy Jimenez to Luis Robert to Yoan Moncada, who I think is incredibly underrated now. Just so many fun guys on that team. Great rotation, great diversity in all their personalities. Like, I think it's so good. Heck, even Tony La Russa in his own way is at least interesting. You know what I mean? Unlike Aaron Boone, who nobody likes, and nobody really likes Tony La Russa, but at least he's kind of interesting, just as a person who's a fan of stories. At least he's kind of interesting. So I'll be looking forward to that. We've also got Red Sox Rays. I'll be rooting hard for the Rays in this series. Don't really care about what happens after that, but going to be rooting hard for the Rays because I hate Boston. And then on Friday, we've got another game between the White Sox and Astros, another game between the Red Sox and Rays. Isn't it glorious? This is like March Madness style. We're just going to be having baseball games going all Friday. I am absolutely going to be tuning into those. Braves, Brewers, Dodgers, Giants, obviously being the headliner, 9:37 p.m. Eastern time. That's probably the game out of all of these that I'm looking forward to the most. But the series I'm looking forward to the most is White Sox Astros. And the reason why, you can read up on that at justbaseball.com. I wrote a little bit of a preview of that series because they are my last team that I'm rooting for, about the White Sox, who I think is going to win. Going to link that in the description. You guys can check that out, both the YouTube description and podcast description. Good stuff. Good stuff. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's episode. Really appreciate it. Thanks for making Locked On Padres your first listen every day, even if today's was a little bit delayed. My apologies. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB. Paul Francis Sullivan, please call him Sully. He brings you his unique perspective on the major leagues, both present. It's free and available on all platforms. In terms of this episode, guys, you can stay tuned for tomorrow's episode, hopefully a crossover with me and Rylan Stiles of Locked On Royals and Locked On Thunder, just talking playoffs and really just hanging out. If you want something that's a good vibe, maybe for some reason you find my personality entertaining, I know I got a review from Jake Cronengerth on a podcast app who said some very kind things to me. I really appreciate it, man, giving me a 5-star review and all that. You guys can send me reviews, and if you send me a review, feel free to put a question in there, and I guarantee you it'll be on the show. So shout out to you, Mr. Rake. I appreciate the comments. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. So feel free to DM me on Twitter and all that stuff. Also, next week, going to be doing for Just Baseball an article on the top 10 most tragic moments of the 2021 Padres season. Last year, I did my top 20 best moments of the 2020 Padres. This year, it's the top. I couldn't think of 21. Guys, look. It would get dark. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want this to become like the end of Annihilation and where Oscar Isaac is losing his mind. Spoiler alert. I don't want to go that deep into doing 21 tragic moments, but going to be doing that on Just Baseball and then doing a podcast talking about that article sometime next week. So that should be a lot of fun, talking with some other hosts on the network about what it means to be in the playoffs or out of the playoffs and what have you. Lots of good stuff to look forward to, including a new camera for all my YouTube listeners. And with that all being said, guys, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from: Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Himalaya, Overcast, wherever, all platforms. You're good. Feel free to send me some 5-star reviews on the Apple Podcast app. Follow the show or myself on Twitter. And until next time, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies, take care.